Live.
Cool. Okay. So the usual 5 minute little editorial here before we get going. I promise this one's pretty quick. But a few things to say, which is that okay, here we go. This is going to be our session today. We'll get to it in 5 minutes. Um, our ongoing theme of signal versus noise, ABT versus and. So Julie Clausen sent me this Substack article this morning that is titled who owns the story you're telling? Advocacy, appropriation, and the ethics of holding someone else's truth. And what this is about is this person is advocating that if you're going to try and tell about somebody else's work, you really should run everything by them that you're going to say and make sure you've got their complete approval and yada, yada, yada. Um, which is nice in a perfect world. But, here's my interpretation of that. Thank you for complicating the narrative. And that's what I see all this stuff as, is that there's a whole group that my buddy Andy Revkin is semi a part of, who are journalists who are advocating that journalists do a better job of complicating the narrative, of telling every single detail of stories, and that because of the MAGA world we live in, they're winning because they're using all this simplicity stuff, and the only way to beat it is by coming at them with all the facts, I guess, which is just and, which is the very polar opposite of everything that we have worked on for all these years. And I read their things and throw my hands up like, how do you think this is ever going to work in a world of too much information? Everything that we talked about, and complicating the narrative. I mean, here's the bottom line: MAGA loves it when you're hard to follow. And that's what it is. You're, advocating obfuscation stuff that's just you got to be willing to take the time to dig through this thing and understand it. So that's my one little side rant. Sorry, Julie. You got anything to say back in return to that? You said you agreed and disagreed.
Yeah, just what you said just kind of clarified it for me. So it's the storyteller, no matter whose story you're telling, is boiling it down to that one thing, and that's the story, instead of all these tangents or making it more complicated. I do completely agree with that.
Well, I think that, it's an issue of leadership in the Democratic Party. And I think a lot of the people that are trying to be leaders are trying to send this signal delicately because it's hard to bluntly advocate. But everybody's got to lighten up. I mean, Obama said this verbatim. You can't just get triggered by micro details. And that's what that thing is advocating, is making sure that you never trigger anybody with a micro detail. At some level in the world of politics, people have to get a little offended and say, all right, that offends me, but let's roll with it instead of trying to sue somebody in your own party because they got it wrong or whatever. That's what the whole article is really about. And it's this dream world where everybody's got the time to do that. And I flash back to the film I made, Sizzle, where I interviewed a bunch of climate skeptics, and one of them said it's so fun trying to communicate against environmentalists. They're so easy to spin circles around because of that very sort of stuff. They can't get their thoughts straight. And he said, I really should tire of shooting fish in this very small barrel, but it's just so fun to flummox them and bamboozle them. And that's the bottom line. I don't know how and when it ever ends, but they certainly have a failing track record at this point. So it's sad. All right, so that's kind of somewhat relevant to our discussion here because it's setting up this context of a world of too much information and trying to help indigenous people work in this world that is just increasingly communicating more and more rapidly. And the more rapid the communication, the less substance you can convey. And everybody would like to convey the substance of what indigenous people are about. So let's see. On that note, can I ask a favor of everybody? We're going to stop sharing. And how about if everybody mutes your video and audio for the first half hour, and we'll bring it down just to our three main guests, which is Charles, who's going to be kind of our host, and Inti and Justin, and I will even bail out here. And so Charles, we all know as a long-term member of the ABT group, our machine learning expert from Seattle, and he's got an interest as well in indigenous cultures. And then, Charles, do you want to introduce Justin and Inti? You've had a chance to look at that manuscript I sent you from them.
Sure. Yeah, so I'll first say that your AI generated version of Machu Picchu, just putting an ad in, we were there in February, and Machu Picchu is really hyped as an amazing place. And there's just no end to the hype. And you get there and it's even more so. I mean, it is something that no matter how much you hype it, it is more astonishing and powerful than any hype. So if you ever get a chance, head down there. And secondly, so I was down there because I was part of a conference in Peru, thank goodness, sponsored by the US Embassy down there. And the goal was to increase AI expertise among Peruvians so that they could address their own Peruvian specific problems. And a bunch of collections of students at this conference were presenting their problems that they'd chosen to work on. And some of them were, for example, getting AI support for various purposes in the Quechua language, because in the Andean highlands, there's a lot of need. AI could have huge impact, but it's not in the right language. English is not the language of the world, right? And so I think Justin and Inte's work is focused on this. The other piece that came in, and this is where ABT becomes very important, it's an unspoken aspect of ABT, unless Park Howell is here, in which case it is loudly spoken. It is, who is your audience? And crucially, the Inte's work and Inte and Justin's work is saying, who is your audience? How do we address them effectively? And that's core to this notion of democratizing AI. So with that, I'll hand it over to Justin and Inte to talk about your work.
Sure, thanks so much. So I'll just give Inte a quick introduction. He and I met, so I'm originally, this is the 2-minute background, but I'm an evolutionary biologist, but I'm ironically from an Amish town where no one taught or believes in evolution. And throughout my career, I worked in Latin America for many, many years. And in part of that, I did a study abroad here in Ecuador. And then fast forward a number of years through the rest of grad school and a postdoc, I decided to come down here so I could build a lab and do all my work. Inte was in one of my first semesters here, which I really feel bad for him because I have no Spanish training and I had 2 weeks to prepare classes from nothing. And so then cycling through a number of years, you know, building everything that we've been working on, he came and worked in our research division as the scientific communications director, linking between the marketing department and the science and research. And so he did a fantastic job, but we all kind of noticed that his talents were sort of being wasted and we wanted to see him do more research. And so thankfully, you know, he's in a PhD program starting this semester and now is like really bringing about this research. And so he has a number of master's degrees, which is admirable to collect so many, but one of which is in AI and in public communication and scientific outreach. And so linked with some of my research, we work, you know, I study these poison frogs like the ones behind me, and I've worked with a lot of indigenous communities, which I think is something that we don't need to teach them in so much as we have a lot that we can mutually learn together. And then part of that, I've been trying to work and develop relationships. And so that's when he came to me that he wanted to think about doing, you know, a PhD in this kind of work. I thought it was fantastic because I'm not an AI person. My wife is really big into it in medicine here, but for me, I'm old school, but I'm happy that they can pull me along. And so we've been kind of co-developing this thesis, which I think is really wonderful. Some of which is designed to how do we communicate to indigenous communities, for example, when there's a public health issue. So we had a number of deaths recently, which were completely avoidable due to contamination, bacterial infections and things. And one of the things I'm working on with some colleagues at Yale is to bring phage therapy here. So in indigenous communities, they don't want filters and medicines and things. They want Mother Nature solutions. And so bacteriophages is an ideal solution. So one of our solutions with Inti, and part of his thesis, is how do we develop this communication and dialogue and a system, a way of communicating with indigenous communities. And part of that is we're teaching some of our undergrads in a critical thinking class that they develop short videos to communicate with these various communities, including agricultural people, et cetera. So there's a lot of, he's got one of the most ambitious in terms of diversity and number of chapters I've ever seen. But I think because he's one of the most gifted writers I've ever seen, particularly in another language, he's going to be able to achieve it. But we're really excited that we can meet with some of you folks. You know, I had met Randy when I was a master's student in around 2006-07. And so, you know, I reached out because when Inti was writing in one of his papers, you know, cite some of his stuff. And then 5 minutes later, I was like, why don't I just write him? Like, they should meet, you know. And so now this is the opportunity that they get to meet. And so I'm really excited to present you guys with Inti. I think he's got an amazing career that's just getting started literally this month. But, you know, keep an eye on him. He's going to be going places. So now it's your turn, Inti. You can talk. And he's also very shy in English. but he's an amazing writer in English. So he said, please forgive him if there's any, he's not used to speaking English, much the same as I wasn't used to speaking Spanish. So we'll be forgiving with him and very kind.
Well, thank you, Justin. Good morning, everyone. It's a truly an honor to be here with you, with Randy, with Charles, and with all your team. Your work has inspired me who of who has tried to make science not only understood but felt. And well, Justin gave a big presentation, and today I want to share a story about artificial intelligence, interculturality, and the voices that machines still cannot hear. So, well, my name is Inti. Inti is a Quechua name, like in Peru, like in Ecuador, and Bolivia. Inti, it means son, the god son of the indigenous people. And yeah, I come from a small indigenous community in the Ecuadorian Andes called Pakistancia, near to a big volcano called Cayambe, a place of wine, of rituals, and oral stories. No? And where I grew up, knowledge was not written; it was spoken, it was sung and shared. That's how I first learned that communication is not just about words; it's about listening too. Since I was a child, I always written and film stories like Randy. I studied film here in Universidad de las Américas in Quito, and specializing in documentary cinema because I wanted to capture what the news never shows: real lives, collective memory, and dignity. And well, then at the end of my career, I received an Erasmus scholarship to study mass media and audience analysis in the UK, and that I think it was a big moment because in that moment where I learned the stories are not only art, but they are a strategy. And how we frame a story determines who understands it and who gets left out. And well, then I completed a master in political communication, understanding political not as partisan but as social. It's about how we build bridges between knowledge and people and how we make information public right. And well, as Justin said, I work as a research and outreach content manager, and now through my PhD at Universidad de Barcelona in Spain, I'm exploring how artificial intelligence can become part of that bridge if we teach it to listening. And yeah, but here's here's the problem. As artificial intelligence becomes central to science, to health, and education, it is learning from only one kind of word. Most AI systems are built in English, like Charles said, trained on urban data and designed for people with a stable internet, with digital literacy and Western reasoning. And that means that billions of people, especially indigenous and rural communities, are invisible to this machine, to big machine. And yeah, in this year with Justin, we wrote a paper called AI is Locking Out Indigenous Voices, Why We Need to Democratize the Benefits of AI. And in this paper, we argue that this exclusion is not just technical, it's epistemic. AI is not only failing to include people, it is excluding entire systems of knowledge. And for example, let me give you a simple example. In Ecuador, a Quechua Andean farmer might say, quiero purutu para julio, hayak debo sembrar. A mix of Quechua and Spanish meaning, I want to plant beans for July. When should I do it? To us, that's perfectly normal question rooted in seasonal knowledge and food security. But for AI, trained on formal English or translated to Spanish, that input is just unrecognizable. The algorithm rejects it, not because it's wrong, because it's different. And the same happens with oral and metaphorical expressions. When a woman says, like, we plant when the moon sleeps, she's describing a real agricultural algorithm built from generations of observation. But AI can read that. It's a poetry, but not like data, not like knowledge. And that's what we call algorithm colonialism, where digital systems replicate the same exclusions that once erased indigenous languages, and now at algorithm scale. And I, in its current form, listened but doesn't understand. And therefore, our paper proposes three keys should to make AI truly inclusive, to design it not as universal mind, but as a plural intelligence. First, we must build AI for a low bandwidth and hybrid language environments. In Ecuador, for example, WhatsApp is more common than the internet of big platforms or iPhones or MacBooks, but WhatsApp is like the basics. So instead of building massive data heavy systems, we can design voice-based AI assistant that recognize code switching, Spanish mixed with Quechua, and that answer using culturally relevant language. Second, AI must align with indigenous temporalities and governance. In the Andes, life follows like a cyclical time. The wreathing of the moon, the planting festivals, the ceremonies like Quillaraimi, like Inti Raimi, a big ceremonies and rituals around the year. And science and technology often more move like a line linearly. Indigenous logic moves more cyclical, really with another rhythm. And AI could synchronize its alerts with these local calendars, creating a bridge between algorithm precision and cultural resonance. And what? And third, we must treat oral and ceremonial knowledge as a valid data. If a story, if a song, if a ritual contains ecological information, that is knowledge. And I must be able to process those forms, not as noise, not as a mistake, but as another signal, another form. And when designing this way, AI can strengthen community resilience, cultural autonomy, and local governance, not by replacing human knowledge, but amplifying it. And this is where your work, ABT team, Randy, Charles, resonates so deeply with us. The ABT framework and therefore is more than a storytelling formula. It's a cognitive architecture, a way to turn complexity into meaning. We realized that the same structure that helps scientists tell better stories can also help algorithms structure better conversations. In our research, the ABT pattern appears everywhere. For example, nth represents coexistence, different knowledge living side by side, but is the tension, the epistemic asymmetry, the cultural gap, and therefore is the bridge, the space where transformation happens. And in a way, DBT is an algorithm of empathy. It recognizes conflict into understanding exactly what AI needs to do. Imagine if a voice-based AI systems in the Amazon could use ABT logic to communicate health message. There is a bacteria that lives in water and it can make children sick. But if we boil the water and keep animals away from streams, we can prevent it. Therefore, your community can stay healthy by following these steps. That's not just data, that's a story, like a story. And that's communication that connects.
So, okay, let me jump in here with a couple of comments. This is really excellent. And as Justin said, you're a great communicator. That's all really laid out very clearly. First thing I think I have to recommend is that most everybody in this group, we plan a field trip to Ecuador sometime in the near future to come down and help you with the ABT. But also I want to mention just one little tidbit that's coming to my mind that I think almost has some relevance to this, which is long ago, I read this tremendous book called Witness to War by a guy named Charlie Clements. He had been a Vietnam veteran. He was a doctor in the Army. And he, in the mid 80s, when there was a horrible civil war in El Salvador, he just got inspired and packed up a big black medicine bag and went down there by himself, snuck into the country, went up in the mountainside, and began working with indigenous people there that had all these health issues. And he also brought with him a couple books on ethnobotany. And one of the things that he read up on and learned about was that there are these willow trees there, and the bark of the willow tree is rich in salicylic acid. And he began to show them that there had been this once upon a time cultural tradition of drinking this willow bark tea that would cure all sorts of ailments, but had been lost largely by the whole collective population. And what he ended up talking a lot about was over and over again, he would try and get them to drink the willow bark tea, but they all kept pointing at his black bag saying, no, we want the pills. We want what you bring to us from your culture. And I wonder if there's a little bit of a parallel with that mindset of, do you run into that of indigenous folks thinking somehow that these people with their technology and AI and things like that, putting more trust in it than they should, not being sufficiently critical of it? Have you encountered any of that so far? You guys?
Yeah, so Inti, do you see that your indigenous groups in the Andes overly trust the fancy new stuff cargo from the West? Is it?
Well, in my community, we have a lot of because the location is close to the capital, to the research centers, near of universities. My community, since a long time ago, we have a perfect mix of this knowledge. There's a lot of people, Western researchers, universities, going to these communities and talking and studying and taking this knowledge. But it's kind of hard to know that most of these research there's no a dialogue, a bridge, a communication. Science go to these communities and say, you have to do this, you have to do that, and people try. They really try. They really listen, but there's a gap. There's a cultural gap where this knowledge or where these forms are not cultural relevant to these people, because it not merge with all system, and yeah.
I think what we were trying to get at a little bit is what's the level of trust like? Is that what you're sort of thinking, Charles?
Right, but I think what Inti is saying is that you bring in the black bag with the pills, but if it doesn't fit into how people operate in the world, it's not going to land right there, and it's not going to connect, because we can only see. I mean, I interesting. I've read a number of sources that we construct our reality. It's not like there's an objective reality out there that we see. We construct our reality, and if things don't fit into that reality, we cannot process them. we simply cannot see them or cannot use them. And I think this comes home to Inti's point that whatever we do, and it's back to the ABT of audience, whatever we present or offer or share with people has to be fit into their context, the audience's context. What is their worldview and how does this fit into it?
I think there's a lot of presentations of these things, and like Inti mentioned, his community is much closer than other ones that I work in too. So people might go there once a year and say, hey, look, check this out. Some other indigenous community friends of mine, when they have better reception, you know, when AI came out, they would generate some images and play with it and then disappear, and that was it. So one of our goals was to create, you know, this WhatsApp plugin that Inti mentioned, because it respects the limitations they have technologically. They have WhatsApp, they have internet, they have some connectivity, but they have, you know, there's difficulties in hybrid language. They don't always have receptivity. So like in the Amazon, you know, they've got, they have decent receptivity, but storms come or something comes and they lose, you know, the connectivity for a while. Their satellite reception and stuff dies out. So we're trying to come up with a way that they can send these voice messages, translated into text, sent to ChatGPT, a response sends back, and then translated back and read to them, so that when they lose receptivity, clouds come through, whatever, the message sends when the message sends, but it doesn't kill their battery. And also, you know, all of the kind of hybrid language and all the other necessities that we've mentioned too. You know, we have a lot of hope for this. For example, like the college entrance exams, people from communities that are much further, like Inti's, have a huge disadvantage because they have standardized exams, and that's how you get the scholarships. So were it not for these scholarships, many of these students can't study at the universities. You know, we talked about the health issues as well. You know, there's also, you know, volcanic eruptions, you know, there's landslides. There's a lot of these kind of pieces of news that need communicated really quickly. But the other thing too is that they have a structure that needs to be respected. So it needs to go through the leaders of the community and then disseminated from them, because if you jump, you know, straight to the end users, it also doesn't respect their community structure. And then that's also kind of a failed sending of a message as well. So there's a lot of these considerations. So we're hoping is to develop something that works better with what the people have. You know, some 90% of many communities have a cell phone that's a smartphone. It's very, very basic and it has little connectivity, but they have, you know, internet through messages and stuff. But we need to meet them, you know, more than halfway, so that they have a platform they can use and then respects, you know, their culture and languages and things like that. And then we think that they can use it. So to answer Randy's question, like, we don't think most of these people really have even used it all to even trust or have an opinion yet, because at the basic stage that we're at, you know, they maybe have done a couple demos or done some playing, and it's certainly not integrated with them and the, you know, their daily use or anything like that yet. We think there's the potential, and what we want to do is try to get in a little earlier instead of begging people, please, like, consider other languages, this and that. We wrote this paper, you know, particularly, you know, when Inti started mentioning some of these concerns, I said, well, you know, to me, this reads as a perspective. And I think we need to really lay this out so we detail exactly what the communities need. In case we get a friendly ear, then we're able to communicate with them and they can understand the message.
Let me toss in one comment here, Inti. When you were going through the three elements of the ABT and how that applies to everybody, I think you had it really exactly right. You know, in my trained ear of ABT, like sometimes I hear people going through that stuff. I'm like, oh no, you not got it right. But no, that was really good. And I think that it does give you these three elements as a starting point to try and get common ground. And especially when you're dealing with, you know, these cultural interfaces and you've got oil and water going on, two groups that just aren't mixing, and you run the risk sometimes of having sessions where they both walk away and just there was no communication happening at all. And the ABT gives you a starting point where at least we can agree on these elements for our topics of discussion. What do we have for agreement? What do we have for contradiction? What do we have for consequence? Because I've been to those sorts of working groups and things before where you can walk away and say absolutely nothing was gained there. The two groups were talking past each other. That's so common throughout everywhere these days, is two groups talking past each other.
Yeah, I want to highlight, so Inti, you're really great at sound bites. And so first, I'm going to do two things. First, I'm going to put some of the phrases you put out that I thought were wonderful. Then I want to focus on one of them. And one thing you said was that it's an algorithm of empathy. And that is the notion that knowledge is not just cerebral, it is emotional. And you have to have that emotional connection, or there is no connection. And that's just how our brains are made. And then similarly, you said that it's a cognitive architecture that takes complexity and generates meaning. And again, that's the notion of connecting. Facts kind of don't mean anything except how they fit into our frameworks, or the audience's framework, if you like. And both the ABT and any interaction with other people, other cultures, let's say, different from one's own, involve taking that complexity and creating meaning out of it. And that's meaning in terms of the audience. And that's central to ABT's goal, and also what you're doing. But I think that was a great characterization. And you also said that, and this is, I think, central to ABT, that it helps science be understood and also felt. And again, this highlights the notion that we are not rational creatures, right? We think we are, and we like to talk about our rational piece, but that rational piece is like one little monkey on a giant blue whale of other cognitive functions and emotions going on. And I think the ABT is really, when it works, it's because it is making the message felt by the audience. So, and that's, I think, the key point, that it's really what ABT and effective use, let's say, of AI have in common. That you can bring in something like AI, and Justin, this is what you were saying, you can bring it in, but if it's not going to fit into how people use the information, what they're able to do with it, how they fit it into their world, whether it's addressing their real problems, it won't stick. It'll just bounce off. Okay. Or potentially worse, it becomes something that they use because it's the only option, but it doesn't really work. And so that's kind of an acceptance without really being a good acceptance. It's just an acceptance because there's no option. And this is that same notion of, you can bring in something like AI, but it has to be felt. It has to incorporate on that deeper level, or else it will not really work for the people you've brought it to. And so understood and felt applies both to ABT when it works well, and it applies to applying something like AI, this wowie pill, right, brought into some community.
Yeah, yeah. As you said, we're gonna test. We're gonna try. We are just starting this research, and the main goal is not, not just be part of this, or where that people or indigenous people get that knowledge and be part of that. And it's about more like be part of their culture, like be part of their self. And yeah, because that, when we got, for example, the oral transitions, these adopted rituals or rhythms in their context. Mhm.
Yeah, and I'd like to highlight too the way, one neat thing about this paper, which I'm sorry you haven't read, but it kind of Inti laid it out, that there's several levels at which AI is failing in terms of being truly democratized and meeting all people everywhere. And an obvious one is language. And there's research on this. And there's a comment I came across the other day that AI, because it's all trained on English, is turning most of the world's languages into statistical irrelevancies, right? It's making them invisible just through the power of statistics. Just there's, because there's so little of that training, or like you mentioned, the code switching language, it simply doesn't exist in the world of AI. So that's one level of exclusion. And then another that you mentioned, Justin, is the bandwidth, right? Here in the US, we're building these hundreds of billions of dollars of data centers, consuming vast resources to propel AI for people who have really high bandwidth and have access to these data centers and that whole infrastructure, that whole paradigm for how to use AI fundamentally excludes most of the world. Okay. And then the third level you mentioned, another level, is the, I think you called it epistemological, but it's how knowledge is structured and the assumptions about what knowledge is and how it should be processed. And it's that classic contradiction that the West, we have this logical approach to the world that is very effective in some ways, but it reaches something like in Asia, the notions of Buddhism, which allow, they don't require the excluded middle. Okay, like in Western logic from Aristotle, it's true or it's not true, P or not P, and that's it. You can't have both. And there are logical systems that do allow both, and we're simply not equipped to handle those. And when AI is built, when all the research and all the development is done by people in Western culture, and we develop according to those assumptions, we are automatically excluding these other ways of processing the universe and of processing the world. And that's another level of exclusion. So one interesting thing about Justin and into your work is you articulated these multiple levels at which AI, in terms of being truly democratic, is just broken. And it will not fix itself. I remember reading just yesterday that as Karl Marx said, whoever owns the means of production has the power. And this applies to AI, right? Yeah. Who owns the means of production? You've got to get that means of production spread out, or else it's going to be owned by Amazon shareholders in the United States.
Well, and that gets back to our Shirley's Law that if you don't tell your own story, somebody else is going to tell it for you. And you're probably not going to like how they do that. Everybody feel free to activate and jump back in now. We got about 15, 20 minutes remaining. And
everyone turn your pictures back on. Yeah, just to
jump back in, the whole group. And Andy, did you want to say that? I saw you made a comment about Mayan culture, or what was that?
No, it's not about Mayan culture. There is a longstanding formula in product marketing, an acronym called MAYA, M-A-Y-A, and it stands for most advanced yet acceptable. In other words, it's a balancing act between something new versus something familiar. And so you want to be sort of right on that edge of, to our earlier presenters' points, you want to be right on that edge of fitting into the audience's view of the world and understanding of how things work, but just kind of also be a little neophilic or push the envelope a little bit. So it's just a matter of, I think we're all saying the same thing. It's a matter of fitting in without going too far.
Yeah. Hey, Charles, can you read again those couple of little quotes from Inti, and Matthew will transcribe them into the chat window just for everybody's benefit. You had written down. What were those couple things that you went through?
Yeah, so the one was saying that ABT is a cognitive architecture that can turn complexity into meaning. And another was that it was an algorithm of empathy. And the third one was that ABT allows science to be both understood and felt. And I think the common thread that ties all these together is recognizing that you have to reach your audience and connect with your audience on an emotional level. And facts without emotion are fundamentally meaningless. And that's just how we have evolved as creatures. And that's how our brains work. And I think that ABT addresses that specifically. It is reaching the audience, when done right, on their own terms, in the value system that matters to them, so that they care. And caring is fundamentally an emotional response. And so it's connecting with their emotional world.
Matthew, how does that square with your experiences of the last 6 years in teaching the ABT?
Oh yeah, the importance of dream nightmare action, just like getting just bigger and bigger and bigger in our heads as time goes by, how much we need to hit those emotional moments, that it can't just be about the facts. Absolutely. That's been our journey.
And it's mostly wrapped up in that first element, the and element. In the beginning, 6 years ago, when we began teaching this stuff intensely, we felt that all three elements were created equal. And nowadays, the problem and the solution slash actions are pretty objective and straightforward. It's all in the framing, which is the opening, the and material, the blue material. That's the agreement. And I think that's exactly what you're saying, is that everybody needs to put a lot of focus on that first element before you even get going on problem.
Well, Randy,
Yeah.
the first element matters, but in terms of meeting people in their own space in a way that they're going to care, the problem statement has to be a problem they care about, right? If I'm talking to an audience, I'm saying they for the audience, and the solution has to be a solution that makes sense. So each of those three things has to connect to the world of the audience.
But hang on a second. One of the little journeys that we've had in the past just couple of years, the realization more and more of trying to plant the problem in the setup, right, Matthew? Trying to take the inverse of the problem and begin the whole process with the dream being the inverse of the problem, as opposed to going right to the problem.
Right. And making that dream a shared dream, something that you and your audience are both like, oh yeah, that would be a good thing. So you can start the journey together that way.
We have found, working with science-oriented people and information-oriented people, they're so literal-minded, they tend to go right to the problem.
Yeah.
And the problem is the supercharged thing eventually that will get the greatest amount of focus. But what you want to try and do is begin the process with the inverse of the problem. And that's where you're doing that work to find out where you have the, something that you have in common with them and putting it into their terms. And that's it. You know, if you can explain your problem in terms of the dream that appeals to them. Does that make any sense, Charles?
Yeah, actually, Mike just put a comment. The ordinary world must be recognizable as an ordinary world. If
Yes.
I present, here's the ordinary world. I'm in Seattle and I've got wireless, fiber optic bandwidth and da 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 da. If that's not the ordinary world to someone at Machu Picchu, then I've not connected. So at every step, it has to be the audience's reality.
Justin, Inti, is that making sense in that element?
Absolutely. I think the other thing that we haven't talked about is the benefits that we, as people not from the indigenous communities, can get from them too. The exchange of information. I mean, there's never a time where I don't go into one of these communities and I think I'm going to, give an outreach talk, and then I learn way more from them than vice versa. And so at the end of our, opinion piece, we talk about that this is, not just, so they can get information as well. We have a mutual benefit. By opening a dialogue, we now have, the ability that we can gain information from them. There's enormous diversity of, information, biodiversity, cultural things, recipes. I've never eaten such delicious food as these guys. Like, these guys make the best soups in the world. And, there are 2,000 types of potatoes that they know everything about them. So therefore, for us, it's, this is not just an altruistic act. This is, literally just being fair, and we can get a lot from them too.
Wait, are you serious? Literally 2,000 types of potatoes?
Yeah, there's over 2,000.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Really?
Yeah.
You have no idea. There's so many types of bananas. My neighbors here they would play a joke on me. I would ask for something, and they would give me a different type of banana each time to see if I noticed. So I would try to get one type, and then give me another one. Then they try to give me another one, and there's a potato that you boil that just makes the soup thicker, like it dissolves. And if you use that for something else, it's totally wrong. But and you can't replace it. So you think it's this creamy soup, but it's a boiled potato that's slow boiled until it makes a creamy, thick soup. It's amazing.
And how are they doing in terms of preserving that sort of cultural and ethno knowledge and stuff? Are they losing chunks of that?
Yes and no. There's a number of celebrity chefs. There's on Netflix, there's Virgilio Martinez is one in Peru, in Central. He does a lot of that work. Rodrigo Pacheco here in Ecuador, and he has Boca Bolivia, and he has the giant edible forest as his conservation project. There's a number of people that do these things that preserve it and educate. So for example, Rodrigo cooked for our wedding, and we're probably the only wedding I know that they served, like edible insects and fruits, and jungle, dishes at a wedding, and my mom was terrified, but she still ate it. But, there's people that, I mean, again, as a foreigner, I've been here almost a decade, and I am very much a sponge to learn. And there's no shortage of things you can learn, like going around here and talking to people.
And so in terms of ABT dynamics, we talked for a long time there about trying to use that first element, the agreement element, to understand their culture and put your interests into their world. But I got a feeling it's even more difficult trying to do the reverse, as you're saying, going back to the fast-paced world of everybody in running, in circles, and like, why should I be interested in this? And trying to find a way to frame it in a way to grab their interest, and what is their dream that this could work into.
And we need to be patient when they try to communicate. For example, we have a colleague who's doing a documentary series, and he said when the communities there want to make the documentaries, they can take him 2 or 3 years to make a 10-minute film. And so for him, he has to, we have a high productivity university. You need to be publishing constantly. And you can't rush. You get the product when they're happy with it, when they community says, yes, this is done. And so that's something for us. And for me and Inti, we've reached out to some Indigenous communities like in Canada to try to work with them on how they're incorporating Indigenous languages. And it takes us 6 weeks to get a meeting, and then they cancel. And then
that kind of comes full circle to that little bit that I opened with, the thing that Julie Clausen had sent me about needing to make sure you're not appropriating people's knowledge and getting it all approved by them. But there's got to be some common ground point in the middle where if you take forever, you've defeated the whole purpose in a world that's screaming along.
Yeah, but I think that we were talking about the Iliad, right? I was talking to you.
No,
Randy,
you had mentioned I instructed you to share that with us right now.
So this is an exact example. What Justin's saying is people have we have different ways, different cultures, ways of interacting, and maybe in the Western world we have next, and in the Iliad, you may recall the Catalog of Ships chapter, which when we read the Iliad, there's a whole chapter that just lists these 30 people from this village sent a ship to Troy because it was the battle for Troy. And the whole chapter is just listing towns and ships and people that went. And you read this, and I read this and think, why the hell am I reading this? This whole chapter just goes on and on. But in the context of the bards reciting this poem, this was knitting those communities together. And the audience knew people from these towns, and these were their relatives and their neighbors. So all this apparently pointless drivel about the ship catalog was really about connecting people to the story and connecting them together. And it was very valuable in its context. And I think that, getting 6 weeks to get a meeting, well, there's downsides to that, but there's also a way of getting at connection and cooperation and agreement that we, Western next misses out on. And we can learn from that. To Justin's point, everybody can learn when there's good interaction. It's not a one-way street. And I'll give if I may give a potato example. So I think this might be in one of Jared Diamond's books, but the analysis in the up highlands of Peru and in the Andes, the farmers are incredibly inefficient. They have 1 million different plots of land that are far apart. They're tiny. They're growing all these different plants. And so it's they have no economies of scale. It's just a crazily inefficient way to grow crops, except as opposed to the monoculture in Idaho, right, for potatoes, except that because environmental conditions change, it turns out that this plot of land, the crop fails, but this plot, it succeeds, and this plot fails year by year. The Andean farmers have optimized a way to be sure that they always have enough food. And Idaho has optimized a system for lots of food, but very vulnerable to a blight or like in Ireland. And so we might go to the Andes and say, wow, this is a terrible system. But when we take time to learn what's going on, we discover it's actually highly optimized to the situation and something we can learn about, hopefully before the next potato blight wipes out our food supply here in the United States. So that point that it's a two-way street. And now we're down to the 4-minute call, Randy. So
Yes, exactly. Let's see. Mike Strauss, did you want to make some comment on the Iliad?
Only, Charles, that I'm impressed that you read it, because I had to read it in Latin class, and all we were concerned about was how quickly we could get through it. And I don't think we remembered much of anything from it. So I appreciate that.
Well,
The other is just a more of a comment on what you just said. I remember working with people at the International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center near Mexico City. And the irony of that is that they were working on developing these monocropped high yield varieties of corn. And when you pulled out of the center, when you were in the center, you saw all these uniform, beautiful fields. You pulled out of the center and you saw these more indigenous fields of corn that was at every single stage, from young corn to old drying out corn. And when you actually looked at it, the high producing field produced, I think the number was like some huge tonnage per hectare. And if you looked at the indigenous fields, they at any one time they didn't produce very much. But if you looked at them over a year, they produced the same amount, but it was produced over a year. So looking at it, you look at it and go, "Oh, this is inefficient." Actually, it's beautifully efficient for what their needs were.
Oh, that's great. Okay, well, let's see. We're in the final 3 minutes here, and I'm going to show two last slides here to kind of wrap things up. And just hang on 1 second. Don't anybody mute. Let's see if I can go back on here, because these are two more little points that I had, which is this. Back to this. And Mark Dowie wasn't able to join us here today. I was hoping he would, but I mentioned to you guys this tremendous book that he wrote, The Haida Gwaii Lesson. And this is about the indigenous folks of Haida Gwaii Island in Canada who managed to rise up and defend their culture from the onslaught. And it's a tremendous book. Matthew, if you can put that link into the chat window, I strongly recommend everybody get a copy of it and read it. And he comes to our group routinely, and he was here last week, I think.
I bought you a copy. It's on its way.
Great. Okay. And let's see here. And then here, a month ago when I was at Emory University Medical School, and one of the last meetings I had there, they said, "Oh, you got to come next door in this one professor's office." And she has this thing painted on the wall of her office. I took a picture of it, and check this out. Charles, this is very relevant, I think. It hurts when the beauty is lost in the speed. Don't you love that? That's a bit of what you're talking about, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it's not just beauty. There can be any number of things lost in the speed.
Lost in the speed, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that's a lot of what we're looking at here. But the beauty of these indigenous cultures, I think, is part of what we're talking about as well. So let's see. On that note, we're at the end of the hour. Thanks, everybody, very much. That was another invigorating discussion here. Thanks, Inti and Justin. It was really, really great. And keep in touch. Let us know what we can do to help in propagating the ABT. Maybe we can figure out some way to send Matthew down there. He's always up for going to far-flung locations.
It's just amusing for you to send me places. I think that's what it is. It's just a game for you now.
Always up for that. So
sort of like, let's just throw Matthew and see what happens.
he is our messenger to the world with the ABT. So
I'm the ABT missionary. Thanks.
Exactly. That's our ABT missionary. That's your official.
We won't use the word missionary down here. That might not go over.
Okay, yeah, wrong one.
Right. Okay.
Emissary, ambassador, ABT ambassador.
Thanks for having us, Randy. We do really appreciate it.
Betcha. That was great. And thank you, Charles, for doing an excellent job of hosting that one. See everybody next week. No telling what topic we'll dig up for then. So see you then.
ABT, Justin, thank you so much.
So long.
Thank you.